But first we're going to have the folks with the proposed project to come forward with the Williams Company and the other company joint venture involved and take a few minutes and explain their project. You know, Fiscal Court is involved with this to try to make sure the public in our community has the opportunity to ask questions and find out all the facts about a proposed gas line coming through the county. And then, and that being said, then once they make their presentation, then I will take the list that's in the back and call those folks forward in the order that they're on. It's on the sheet. Then you can ask the questions. And the presenters, once they make their presentation, are going to sit over here and you can ask questions to those folks. Thanks. You folks want to come forward? You can introduce yourself when you get up here, please. You may lose this mic in and out. Bear with me. I'm going to hang around here a little bit. Be a little bit of a moderator.
Good morning. My name is Wendell Hunt, and I'm with Williams. I'm with Williams Company. Williams has formed a joint venture with a company, Boardwalk Partners, out of Houston, to build a natural gas liquids pipeline that will traverse from the north.
Can you put the mic up higher?
Just bring it to you. Just take it out of the slide. Take it out. Take it out.
To build a natural gas liquids pipeline that will traverse from northwest Pennsylvania down to the Gulf Coast, where the petrochemical industry can use those chemicals here. Williams is a company that was started back in the early 1900s by two brothers from northwest Arkansas, from the same area of the country as the Walton brothers, Sam Walton. Anyway, Williams started out building sidewalks. They moved from building sidewalks to pipelines, build pipelines internationally. We've been involved in several other business lines, but we're now back into the pipeline business. We own two natural gas transmission lines, and we have an interest in some other natural gas transmission pipelines. We have the Transcontinental Pipeline, which comes out of the Gulf Coast around Texas, goes up to the northeast as far north as New York City. We also have the Northwest Pipeline that travels from the Rockies out to Washington State and Oregon State. Today, I am here to talk about what is proposed to be the joint venture between Williams and Boardwalk, which is known as the Bluegrass Pipeline Project. Magistrates, I have a handout for you guys if I can take a minute to give it to them. I will have additional copies available for folks in the audience, but I can't distribute them right now, but they will be available.
They'll be back here right after the meeting.
Right after the meeting at the back table.
They'll be on the table.
Okay. A few years ago, I guess you guys know that the Marcellus Shale, although it had already been discovered, was the technology to get the natural gas out of the shale had not been developed and refined. But a few years ago, that technology was brought to the market, and we began to develop the Marcellus Shale. When that technology when it came to market, we realized that the Marcellus could probably produce 100 years of natural gas supply for the United States. Williams and several other companies went into the Marcellus to develop that natural gas and bring it to market. And a couple of years ago, when the natural gas prices kind of lowered, a lot of the drillers moved from what is considered the dry gas area of the Marcellus over to the wet gas area of the Marcellus. And the difference between dry gas and wet gas is that the dry gas contains very little, if any, natural gas liquids. The wet gas portion, however, contains pretty good supply of natural gas liquids. The Northeast was not used to the supply of natural gas liquids and didn't have enough infrastructure in place to be able to use those liquids in the Northeast. However, The Gulf Coast, Louisiana, Texas, have quite an extensive petrochemical industry, quite a few facilities, and they can all use that natural gas liquid. And because of the pricing of oil, which got to about $140 a barrel, a lot of these folks are looking at alternative supplies for the feedstock for their petrochem business. And the natural gas liquids was a nice way to look at it. Now, one of the great benefits of using natural gas liquids, it would replace some of the components that are extracted from oil, which of course you know we import quite a bit of oil to the U.S. These natural gas liquids would be produced here in the U.S., could be used in the U.S. for the petrochemical business and the making of plastics. I have here, I'll pass this around to the magistrates. This is my high-tech presentation of how the natural gas business works. What happens is as people go out drilling, as the drillers and the producers are drilling, the gas comes out of the ground and it has to be gathered, collected, and cleaned up before it can be used for things like home heating or power generation. The gas gathering processing business takes those liquids, clean them up, separates them out into two streams. One stream is the natural gas or methane stream, which some people are familiar with because that's what you use for home heating, again, your gas fire logs and all that good stuff. The other stream would be natural gas liquids, and in that stream would be contained things like ethane, propane, butane, pentanes, and some other high-end hydrocarbons. Those hydrocarbons can be used in the petrochem business, like I said, to make plastics. And being able to use those, we can reduce the amount of oil imports, or it would offset oil imports, so that we would be using domestic supply to make domestic products. The project itself, as I said, it would be from northwest Pennsylvania down to the Gulf Coast. It would be a 24-inch pipeline, roughly 1,100 miles of pipeline that would go from northwest PA down to the Gulf Coast. One of the good things that happened for Williams and for Boardwalk is we decided to partner. Boardwalk has a pipeline that's existing. It's roughly 600 miles of pipe that goes down to the Gulf Coast, and that pipeline, we can start using that pipeline near Hardinsburg, Kentucky, and go all the way to the Gulf Coast. Williams would be able to build a pipeline out of northwest PA down to Hardinsburg, which would only be 500 miles. So we would be saving roughly 600 miles of new construction simply by partnering with Boardwalk to take that pipeline to the Gulf Coast. And we think that is a pretty good deal. The pipeline, I would like to say that, when we began working on this, we started working with Boardwalk some time ago, and we did not sign a definitive agreement with Boardwalk until the Tuesday after Memorial Day. So that is part of the reason why a lot of the things about the project are not well defined yet. We are still working on the pipeline route because we're very early in the process. We have gone out to ask for survey permission from landowners in Ohio, Kentucky, and what we're asking permission for is to be able to define the pipeline route itself. Because the route that many of you may have seen is a proposed route. It is not a definite route because we did some very preliminary work. We can't define a route until we actually go out and survey and see what kinds of things that are along that path that would make it, that would interfere with being able to construct a project. I know that you guys are wanting some information about the project, and we're here to provide you with as much information as we can. At this point, again, there won't be a lot of information specifically because we're very early. For instance, we are looking to put this pipeline in service in the last quarter or the last end of year 2015. If we back that up, looking at roughly an 18-month construction window, we would be looking at beginning construction somewhere second quarter of 2014. And if we back that window up just a little bit, we would be looking at trying to acquire rights-of-way easements by end of year 2013. But before we can begin to acquire those easements, we do have to do these surveys to understand what kinds of things are out there. For instance, a big driver for us right now is the Indiana Bats. We have to do the Indiana Bat survey, which is a monumental task, and we have about 6 weeks to do that. So we're asking for permission so that we can do the survey to find out where those habitats are, because that would greatly impact the project. So some of you may have been contacted by land agents asking for survey permission. Now, I do think you might have a few questions or a few concerns about the safety of the project. I do have with me today Rob Hawksworth, who is our chief land and permitting guy, and he has a brief presentation he would like to make, and then we would be available for questions.
Good morning. I'm Rob Hawksworth. I work in the land and GIS and permitting area for Williams in our NGL and Petchem engineering and construction group. And I think I don't have any real formal presentation, but I want to start addressing questions that I know exist right now that could be, I think, pretty straightforward. One of the questions I think that I've heard regularly is the right of this project, this pipeline project, to utilize the right of eminent domain. And I will say, preliminarily at least, in situations where Williams has had the right to use eminent domain, we've used that right very sparingly, very rarely. We have thousands of miles of pipelines in existence today, and of those, probably hundreds of thousands of landowners that we've reached successful negotiations with without having to go to that point if we had that right. So we are always working and looking to seek mutually agreeable terms and conditions with every landowner that we work with. Our focus is to find people who are willing. We want to work with people who are willing to work with us. That's as straightforward as it can be. And so we've been proven to be able to reach agreement with landowners to a great extent when it comes to that issue, whether we have the right of eminent domain or not. Now, Bluegrass Pipeline is going to be transporting, as Wendell talked about, transporting natural gas liquids from the Marcellus and the Utica Shale areas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Eastern Ohio. And that transportation, we will be transporting that as a common carrier under the Interstate Commerce Act. So, meaning that any interested potential shipper, we're a common carrier. We really don't care whose liquids they are, as long as they're willing to abide by the terms of our tariff and pay the tariff. They have the right to transport product on the line and fill it up as much as we can, hopefully. And then if it's at capacity, then we either limit the additional volumes that can come in from producers, or we look at expanding the capacity of the line. So it all depends on the growth in the marketplace, if you will. But under the Interstate Commerce Act, as I understand it from talking to our counsel at least, since I'm definitely not an attorney, then under the Interstate Commerce Act, that tariff is what is approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. This project would not have any other aspect of it be either regulated or overseen by the FERC, for those of you who are familiar with natural gas pipelines and FERC involvement in those projects, which uses federal right of eminent domain as opposed to state. So to the question of Bluegrass Pipeline and whether it has a right of eminent domain in the state of Kentucky, we believe we have that right under Kentucky law, but we won't know, based on the way Kentucky law is right now and the definition of it, we won't know that until a court tells us we have that. So it's an open question at this point. And but we can confirm that we won't have any eminent domain power under federal jurisdiction or federal law. So, And I think what I just said is probably a fairly good synopsis or matches up with an analysis that was done recently. You may have found it on the website for the Kentucky Resources Council. So thankfully we came to the same conclusion. But until this issue is resolved, we'll continue to try and find landowners that are willing to work with us so that we can work with them. And as Wendell said, our whole focus is to try and find a route. We've got a preliminary route on paper, but that route really doesn't mean much until such time as we can find people who are willing to work with us and consider the fact that we could put a pipeline across their property. So I wanted to address the eminent domain piece right off the bat. Let me talk just a little bit more about pipeline safety. There's there's almost 3 million miles of pipelines in the United States. And of those, and under the statistics of the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, who tracks these numbers and the incidents, pipelines are the safest, they're the most reliable, they're the most efficient way of transporting energy around the country from one place to another. Over 70% of liquid fuels, gasoline, oil, jet fuel, and nearly all natural gas are transported by pipelines, by buried pipelines. And they're delivered to communities, businesses, and industries. Less than 1/100th of 1%, 0.01%, of all transportation accidents in the U.S. are related to pipelines. So that's why we say that it's the safest method of transporting energy around the country. Now, from a safety standpoint, and talking specifically about our project and the way it happens, the way it works, we design and build safety into the entire operation from the very beginning, and that's at the point where we start at the steel mill, where that pipeline is being created and that steel is being rolled. We have strict metallurgical standards to dictate how hard and strong the pipe will be. And we have on-site inspection for every length of pipe that gets rolled out. Pipes normally come in 40-foot lengths. At that point then, a coating is applied to it, usually fusion bonded, and it's an epoxy coating for protection of the line and prevention of corrosion. Each pipe segment is tracked. Every one that rolls off the mill, each pipe segment is tracked from the mill to the point where it enters the ground. So that we know for every joint of pipe that's put in the ground, we know where it originated, we know what day it was rolled, we know the metallurgy for that particular day's roll, etc. And that is tracked and maintained in our records for as long as that segment of pipe is in existence. After it's in the ground, then we install cathodic protection. That cathodic protection essentially is a series of stations that impress an electrical current on the pipeline, and it is an additional step to prevent the attachment of either molecules or bacteria that might create additional external corrosion and impact on the pipe. So those cathodic protection stations are additional steps to make sure that the pipe is safe and maintained safely. We put safety valves at regular intervals. These are remotely operated valves that are monitored 24/7, and so that in the unlikely event of any kind of an incident or problem, then they can be closed immediately, the flow can stop, and we can address whatever situation might have arisen. Along with that monitoring, that 24/7 monitoring that I mentioned, then we have critical pipeline data, primarily around pressures and volumes, so that we know on a minute's notice what's happening, what's being transported, what pressure the pipelines are operating at, and what kind of volumes are flowing through. And the thing that's critical about the volumes is the fact that if we notice from one point to another that there's the same volume that came in here isn't the same volume that passed through this measuring point, then we're able to say, wait a minute, we may have a problem. It may be a pinhole leak, it may be some kind of problem with the meter itself. So we want to make sure that we identify that and we can do that, again, around the clock. We have well-trained operating and maintenance personnel that are assigned to every segment of the pipeline, so that they have a responsibility for a particular geographical stretch, so that they're the most familiar with that area, and in case of any incident, then they can respond immediately. In addition to that, those operating personnel being on the ground and being assigned to those segments of pipeline, they handle foot patrols, they handle visual observations on the ground, but we also do aerial patrols so that we can cover more ground and see more easily and more quickly when there may be a subdivision that's being built close to the pipeline, or somebody's out digging a trench for another line, or somebody's putting a road in. Then knowing that information is helpful to make sure we get somebody out there and make sure that the pipeline that's in the ground is being protected, and that there is no chance for an issue that would arise from third-party damage. And the reason I mentioned third-party damage is because that is by far the most common cause for any kind of pipeline incident around the country. So, in addition to those on-site and aerial patrols, then we're also checking the internal quality, the internal integrity of the pipeline by periodically running what we call smart digs. They're instrumentation devices that travel down the pipeline. They can measure the thickness, the wall thickness of the pipeline. They can find any kind of microscopic dings, corrosion, anything like that might exist on the inside of the pipeline. They can also measure the thickness of the wall thickness, and they can also measure the condition of the coating on the outside of the pipeline. So that's how technology has progressed in really just the last couple of decades. So with that, now, and lastly, we go through a rigorous education and training program working with local emergency responders to make sure everybody's familiar with the characteristics of the product in the pipe and know how to deal with any issues that might arise. So we do an annual education, if you will, that would also include landowners, that would also include, again, emergency responders, anybody else that might need to know or be interested in what the operation of the pipeline is doing, and be prepared for any kind of prevention. Now, if I think I've seen questions pop up about what do you do if a leak occurs? Well, if a leak occurs, as I mentioned before, with these remotely monitored and operated systems, then the person in the central control room can identify as soon as anything like that happens. They'll shut off the supply, they'll shut off the equipment that is pumping that product through the line, and isolate that segment of line. And we respond immediately by making sure that we get people out there, if they're not already out there on the ground, that they can respond in a very short period of time, and no more than a couple of hours. So, but we start by addressing those kinds of eventualities by making sure that we have an emergency response plan in place that says, here's exactly what we're going to do if anything like this happens. We go through that emergency response plan with your local emergency responders so that everybody knows what everybody's responsibility is in the event of any unlikely occurrence. So we do as much as possible to make sure that we're prepared and that anybody that has the pipeline in their vicinity is prepared for those kinds of events. So, and I think just generally speaking, that's some of the highlights.